September 3rd, 1945. Late afternoon, near Gering, western Nebraska. The tractor sat in the stubble like a red animal at rest, its metal hood hot under the sun. The air smelled of cut alfalfa, raw gasoline, and the faint sourness of sweat trapped in wool and denim. When the old farmer twisted the fuel cap off the Farmel H's small gasoline tank, the scent sharpened, biting at Nakamura Aiko's nose. She watched his hands. Thick, sun-browned fingers moved with unhurried certainty. Switch off, choke out, prime, then the hand crank at the front. Behind her, a U.S. Army guard shifted his weight, the web sling of his M1 carbine creaking softly. The rifle's dark barrel hovered in the corner of her vision like a punctuation mark that could end any sentence. "Now you," the farmer said, in slow English, tapping the crank. "You try, don't baby it." His accent rolled the words in a way her classroom English had never prepared her for. Aiko gripped the iron handle. It was colder than the air, slick where grease met the sweat in her palm. Her stomach tightened. In Yokohama, women did not put their hands on machines like this. Machines belonged to the Navy Yards, to men in blue. On the tractor's fender, a boy's worn leather baseball glove hung by its strap, absurdly casual, an artifact of a country that had not been bombed to ash. She drew in a breath. The guard murmured, "Go on, miss. Give it hell." The engine coughed, half caught, died. Everyone watched her. If you want more stories like this, you can always subscribe and tell me which country you're listening from. 8 weeks earlier, Camp Atlanta, near Holdridge in Nebraska. The first thing Aiko noticed was the sky. It was too big. In Yokohama, the sky had been sliced into ribbons by telephone wires and ship masts. Here, as the olive-drab truck rattled off the paved highway onto a gravel road, the sky in Nebraska stretched in every direction, a pale, lidless blue. She sat on the wooden bench in the truck bed, hands folded over the rough cotton of her issued work trousers, back straight despite every jolt. Around her, the other women clutched their khaki jackets closed. Dust leaked through the canvas flaps at the rear, turning the air into a dry, choking soup. Each curve of the road sent them leaning together, then apart again, like wheat in wind. Through a gap in the canvas, she glimpsed the guard riding on the tailgate. His M1 carbine lay across his knees, muzzle pointed down, sling taut against the faded wool of his shirt. He wasn't watching them. He was watching the fields. That somehow made her more uneasy. Camp Atlanta appeared with no ceremony, just another rise of ground, and then a rectangle of chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Guard towers at the corners like stubby pencils stuck in the earth. A painted sign at the gate read, "Prisoner of War Camp." The English letters still strange to her eye despite years of office. Work. When the truck shuddered to a stop inside the perimeter, an American sergeant in sun-faded HBT fatigues barked an order. Aiko didn't catch the words, only the cadence. A second later, the guard at the tailgate translated haltingly into textbook Japanese. "Ladies, please, step down, slowly, line up here." The word ladies sounded wrong inside the wire. As she dropped from the truck, boots hitting hard-packed dust, Aiko told herself the same thing she had whispered in Manila, in the holding ship, on the train. Keep your head low. Watch everything. Speak only when it protects someone. The sergeant's gaze swept the line, paused when it reached her. His eyes narrowed. "You," he said in English, pointing. "You speak this, don't you?" She felt 20 pairs of eyes tilt toward her, the invisible weight of their expectations settling between her shoulder blades. They seated her in a straight-backed chair that wobbled on the warped floorboards. The camp adjutant's office smelled of carbon paper and sweat, the air stirred by a ceiling fan whose blades only seemed to push the heat around. Aiko folded her hands in her lap and kept her eyes on the edge of the desk. The U.S. sergeant from the gate stood at her shoulder as interpreter. Across from her, behind the desk, sat a captain with thinning blonde hair and a sunburned nose. Beside him, hat resting on his knee, was a civilian in a clean but frayed denim jacket and a checked shirt buttoned all the way up. On the wall behind them, a War Food Administration poster showed a cartoon farmer under the words, "Food will win the war and the peace." On the blotter lay a typed contract form stamped with the name of a beet sugar company. The captain tapped the paper. "We have shortage. Fields need hands," he said, then nodded to the sergeant. The translation came in careful Japanese. "They lack workers. The farmer needs people for sugar beet fields." Aiko inclined her head. "We can work," she answered softly, "if we stay together, as a group." The sergeant's eyebrows flicked. He relayed her words. Another officer at the file cabinet snorted. "Can spread 'em out, Cap. Laundry, kitchen, hospital detail. No reason to bundle 'em." Her back stiffened. Separation meant vulnerability. Eyes on the desk edge, she said, "Women are not used to men outside guard. It is safer if we are one place. Discipline better." The word discipline tasted like ash. The farmer cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was flat and practical. "Don't care about discipline. I need labor that can handle my outfit. Beets, cultivating, maybe some corn. I can take all of them, but I'm not babysitting. One of 'em's got to learn machinery. No use to me if they can't run a tractor." The sergeant translated, stumbling over machinery. Aiko's gaze lifted despite herself. The civilian's eyes were not hostile, only measuring. Women on a tractor. In Japan, she would not have been allowed to sit behind the steering wheel of a car. "If that is the condition," the captain said, already reaching for his pen, "we'll assign the whole lot to Mr. Jensen here." Ink scratched across paper, fixing their summer in place. Aiko felt the decision land on her shoulders with the same dull weight as a full sack of beets. She had kept the women together, but at the cost of tying them to a machine she could not yet imagine in fields she had not yet seen. The truck left the camp in a small cloud of beige dust and followed a section-line road straight into the horizon. On either side, fields spread out in flat, disciplined rows. Corn, dark green and high, sugar beets lower, their leaves dulled by dry soil. Telephone poles marched in single file alongside them. Aiko sat with her back against the wooden stake side, the slats vibrating against her spine. The guard rode up front with the driver now, silhouette visible through the rear window. Without the fence in her immediate vision, the world felt too open, like a page with no margins. They turned into a graveled lane, marked only by a rural mailbox with Jensen painted in fading black letters. The farmhouse was 2 stories of peeling white, with a porch sagging slightly in the middle and a windmill creaking behind the barn. Chickens scattered as the truck braked with a squeal. The first smell was manure, sharp and familiar from the camp stables. The second was something richer, warm grain, machine oil, and the iron tang of rust. A red tractor stood near the barn, its rear tires almost as tall as Aiko's shoulder. Sunlight flashed off its hood, highlighting the raised letters, Farmal. They climbed down under the watchful eyes of a woman in a calico dress on the porch and 2 boys perched on the fence rail, boots swinging. The older boy whispered something. The younger snickered. Walter Jensen stepped out from the shadow of the barn, hat pulled low, denim jacket already dusty. He took them in with one long practical look, then addressed the guard. "So, these are the gals," he said. "We'll start 'em in the beets, see who can keep up." The guard translated, stumbling slightly. The women nodded, eyes lowered. Walter jerked his chin toward the tractor. "And one of you," he added, almost as an afterthought, is going to have to learn to drive that H. Can't keep walking forever." The guard relayed the words. Aiko felt, more than saw, the slight shift of bodies beside her as heads turned, first toward the machine, then toward her. The breeze lifted a strand of hair from her cheek, carrying the smell of gasoline from somewhere near the barn. She kept her face still, but the thought rose, unbidden. Whatever line she had crossed coming through the camp gate, there was another waiting here, painted in red enamel and steel. By mid-morning, the field had narrowed to nothing but rows and heat. The sugar beets stood in staggered lines, their leaves already drooping under the sun. Each woman worked a row, hoe blade biting into the soil to thin and weed, the rhythm dictated by the guard's watch. Aiko's gloved hands were slick inside the issued canvas. Each time she shifted her grip, grit rasped against her fingers. "Keep 'em spaced, not scalped," Walter had said at dawn, demonstrating once with the hoe, neat and economical. He stood now at the headland, arms folded, watching the lines crawl toward him. Aiko settled into a pattern. Step, plant, pull. The hoe's edge cut through the crust, sending up little puffs of dust that lodged in her throat. Her back burned between the shoulder blades. Somewhere to her left, Hannah's blade struck a rock with a sharp, jarring clang, followed by a muffled exclamation. The guard paced along the end of the rows, carbine slung, stopwatch in hand. He called out the minutes in English, then in halting Japanese. Aiko didn't need the numbers to feel the pressure. She could see it in the way Walter's jaw worked as he watched the weeds still standing. She forced herself to move faster, judging the distance between seedlings by eye, trimming away the extras cleanly. The body remembered office desks and tram straps. Now it learned the weight of metal and the gyve of Midwestern soil. Near noon, Walter walked down the rows, boots crushing beet tops, examining their work. He paused beside Hannah's line, frowned at the clumps left untouched, then shifted to Aiko's. His gaze traced her neat, evenly spaced plants. The guard, standing a few paces off, gave a low whistle. "She's quick," he said to Walter, "smart with her hands. If you're still thinking about the tractor, she's the one you want on the seat." The words reached Aiko in fragments as the guard translated. Walter's eyes moved from the row to her face, then to the distant red shape of the farmel at the edge of the field. He didn't smile, only grunted. "We'll see how she does after lunch." Aiko lowered her head again, but her rhythm faltered. The hoe felt heavier. Every stroke now seemed to carve a path not just through the dirt, but toward that waiting machine. The tractor looked larger up close, as if it had grown overnight. Walter led her to it after the midday break, when the sun had slipped just enough to take the edge off the heat. The others returned to the beet rows with a second guard. Aiko remained in the packed dirt yard, dust still clinging to her trouser legs, palms damp inside stiff gloves. Walter patted the side of the fuel tank. "Farmel H," he said. "Good little mule." He pointed at the hood. "Gasoline to start, then distillate if you had it. We'll just stay on gas today." The words blurred, but his gestures were clear. He tapped the ignition switch, mimed turning it on. He pulled the choke, then nodded toward the hand crank at the front. "Watch." He bent, hooked the crank into place, and pulled up with a quick, practiced motion. The engine coughed, chugged, then caught, settling into a rough, shaking idle that vibrated the air around them. An oily, metallic smell washed over her, more concentrated than the faint fumes from camp trucks. The guard stood a few paces away, carbine slung, arms folded too tightly. "Be careful," he muttered, half to Walter, half to himself. "If she falls under it, the captain'll skin us." Walter climbed onto the steel seat, boots finding the pedals without looking. He pointed, clutch on the left, brake on the right, gear shift rising from the transmission case, hand throttle on the steering post. He eased the clutch out. The tractor lurched forward, rolled a few yards, then stopped with a squeak of brakes. He killed the engine and slid down, jerking his chin toward the seat. "Your turn." Aiko swallowed. The metal was warm under her as she climbed up, skirts replaced by coarse trousers that rasped against the edge. Her boots hovered over the pedals, unsure. Walter reached up, took her wrist, and placed her fingers on the hand throttle, then moved her foot onto the clutch. "Slow," he said. "Feel it. Don't fight it." When the engine coughed to life under her command, and the whole machine shuddered forward at her cautious release of the clutch, a jolt traveled up through her leg, spine, and ribs, a mix of terror and something perilously close to pride. For a few seconds, the world shrank to wheel, pedal, breath. Then she stamped the clutch too hard, and the tractor lurched to a stop. Walter grunted, not displeased. "Not bad," he said. "We'll make a driver out of you yet." The guard shook his head, but his shoulders had relaxed. Aiko stared at her dust-smudged hands on the wheel, heart hammering, realizing that for the first time since capture, something in this place had moved because she told it to. The letter came at dusk. They were lining up outside the barracks for roll call when the guard appeared with a canvas mailbag over his shoulder. The sky over Camp Atlanta had gone the color of tin, the last light catching on the barbed wire loops. He called out names from a crumpled list, English syllables wrapped awkwardly around Japanese sounds. Most names drew only a shake of his head. No mail. When he reached Nakamura, his hand disappeared into the bag and came out with a thin envelope, its edges softened by many hands. Black slashes of censor's ink crossed the front like careless brushstrokes. Aiko's fingers tingled as she stepped out of line to take it. The paper was lighter than she expected, her heart heavier. She waited until they were dismissed, until the others had drifted toward the mess hall before slipping inside the barracks and sitting on her bunk. The envelope tore too easily. Inside a single sheet, folded twice. Her brother's hand, tight, slanting characters that snagged against sudden black rectangles where the censor's pen had passed. She read around the wounds, Yokohama, air raids, fire, the date, June. He wrote of great burning, of entire wards gone. Their street name vanished under a black bar. Mother. The rest of the line was thick ink. Her eyes moved faster, hunting for something fixed, alive, safe, any clear anchor. There were only fragments. We still sea wind, no house, maybe rebuild. The room was quiet, except for the distant clatter of trays and a fly whirring the window screen. Aiko's throat tightened. She could see her mother's hands folding dumpling skins at the low kitchen table, hear the ship horns in the old harbor. But those sounds now belonged to a city that might exist only in memory. Later, in the corridor outside the admin hut, a Red Cross bulletin showed a map of Japan with small black flames printed over certain cities, an English caption named Yokohama among them. The guard translated only one word, with an apologetic shrug. "Burned," he said. Walking back to the barracks, Aiko looked at the Nebraska sky, vast, pale, unmarked, and realized she could not say, with certainty, which landscape was more real. The fields she worked each day, or the streets that might already be ash. Her hands would not stop trembling that night. Tomorrow, she knew, there would still be beats, and the tractor, and the guard's watch ticking. The trouble started with something small, a moment's inattention, a notch of metal not quite catching. They were on a slight slope. The tractor angled toward the lane. A flatbed trailer hitched behind carried Crates and Hana, who sat on the edge with her feet dangling, ready to jump down at Walter's wave. Aiko sat on the seat, sweat darkening the back of her shirt, one hand on the wheel, the other near the hand throttle. Easy now, Walter called from ahead, where he was opening the gate. Hold her. She pressed the clutch, felt the machine settle. Her mind, though, was far away, on black bars, over ink, on the word burned. Her heel shifted. The hand throttle, nudged by vibration, slipped forward a hair. The engine rose in pitch, a quick, hungry roar. At the same moment, her boot slipped off the clutch. The tractor jerked. Gravel crunched. The trailer's weight shoved from behind. Hey! The guard shouted, grabbing for the fender. The tractor rolled faster, nose angling toward the shallow ditch that dropped to the beet field. Hana's eyes went wide. The crates slid, wood scraping the trailer bed. Jump! The guard yelled, English sharp in her ear. Jump off! For a heartbeat, Aiko almost obeyed. The ditch, the embankment, the imagined tumble of tractor and trailer flashed in her mind. Hana clutched at the side rail, frozen. Instead of leaping clear, Aiko threw her weight forward. She half slid, half fell from the seat, her hands catching the steering post, boots skidding on the metal platform as the whole machine bounced. The guard's M1 carbine clattered to the ground as he reached for her arm and missed. She ignored him. One foot found the clutch, stamping down. Her hand snapped the throttle back, fingers burning on the metal. The engine screamed, then choked as she yanked the ignition off. Momentum carried them another lurching yard, trailer swaying, before everything shuddered to a stop on the lip of the ditch. Silence rushed in, loud as any explosion. Dust hung in the air. Hana's breath came in small, sharp sounds behind her. Walter reached them at a run, hat gone, face pale beneath the sunburn. He scanned the angle of the tractor, the wheel marks, the guard's dropped rifle, then looked up at Aiko, still braced on the pedals, shoulders shaking. "What the hell were you thinking?" the guard demanded, voice high. "You could have got yourself killed." Walter's gaze stayed on her a moment longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "She kept the rig upright," he said. "That's what she was thinking." Aiko's legs felt hollow. She did not yet have words for the fact that, in that instant, she had not seen uniforms, only bodies in the path of metal and gravity, hers among them. The next day, no one mentioned the near accident, but everything bent around it, like boards warped by heat. In the field, the guard walked a step closer to her row than usual, carbine slung more loosely, eyes flicking toward her with an odd mix of wariness and respect. Hana kept near, shadowing Aiko's pace, her hoe strokes careful and exact, as if precision could keep machines from ever sliding again. Among the women, glances lingered a fraction too long. One of the older internees, Kato-san, spoke less to Aiko and more over her to Hana or the others. At midday, when they sat in the shade of the truck to eat, Kato's rice ball was smaller. She broke it cleanly in two and passed half to Hana, not looking in Aiko's direction. That evening, as the truck idled in the Jensen yard before returning to camp, Walter approached the group with a burlap sack in his arms. His face had the stiff, uncomfortable look she recognized from men forced into ceremony. He set the sack on the ground, opened it to reveal carrots, onions, a few potatoes, their skins still dusty. The smell of earth and chlorophyll rose up. "For the ladies," he said shortly, "for yesterday." He looked to the guard, who translated, stumbling over yesterday and for. Aiko's first instinct was refusal. Ration rules were clear, even in translation. Food flowed along prescribed paths. Taking extra felt like crossing another invisible line, one that might not matter to Walter, but would matter in camp whispers. She looked at the women. Hana's gaze was fixed on the potatoes with a hunger that went beyond appetite. Kato's jaw was tight, but her fingers twitched against her skirt. Aiko bowed, not too deeply. "We are grateful," she said. The words stuck like dry bread. Walter nodded once, relief flickering and gone. Behind him, in the kitchen window, His wife watched, a dish towel twisting in her hands. On the wall above her shoulder, Aiko could see the edge of the poster she'd noticed before, a stern, printed slogan about saving food for victory. On the ride back, the sack rested between Aiko's boots, its weight shifting with each bump. Hana leaned into her shoulder and whispered, "Because of you." Aiko stared at the canvas, tracing the dark outline of a carrot through the fabric, and thought that lines on maps were simple compared to the new lines drawn here. Between duty and survival, between gratitude and debt, between who she had been and who this place was quietly asking her to become. The first rumor came in the form of a word she did not know. Hana brought it back from the beet rows, breathless. "Hiroshima," she said carefully, as if tasting something too hot. The guards said, "A new kind of bomb." Aiko frowned. The syllables meant nothing, yet Hana's eyes were wide in a way that made Aiko's stomach tighten. That evening, in the Jensen kitchen, while the women scrubbed vegetables at the sink under Mrs. Jensen's watchful eye, the radio on the counter crackled with English. A man's voice, clipped and serious, spoke of devastation unlike anything seen before. The word Japan floated clear. "City destroyed." Mrs. Jensen's knife paused above a carrot, then resumed, faster than before. Days stretched. Another name reached them. Nagasaki carried on the guard's muttered conversation with Walter by the barn. Then, Russians in Manchuria. Each new word felt like a stone dropped into water. Aiko could not see the bottom, only the widening rings. One afternoon the truck did not come. Instead, the women were kept in camp, instructed to stand in formation on the gravel yard. The August sun sat high and white above the guard towers. At the flagpole, the stars and stripes hung almost limp. The camp commander stepped onto a wooden platform, papers in hand. A loudspeaker, wired to a pole, squealed before settling into a low hum. He read in English first, voice formal, then a sergeant repeated the message in clumsy Japanese. "The government of Japan has agreed to accept terms of surrender," he said, stumbling over surrender, then repeating it more quietly. The word rang inside Aiko's chest like a struck bell. Men around them shifted, murmured. Someone cursed under his breath. Hana's fingers brushed hers, seeking, finding, surrender. The emperor's face from schoolroom portraits flashed before her eyes, the old oath on her tongue, body and soul for the nation. Yet here she stood, boots raising American dust, hands calloused by American tools. The commander folded his papers. "Work details will continue until further notice," the sergeant added. That night, lying on her bunk, Aiko stared at the dark rafters and thought that the war was over in a way that left nothing finished. The next morning, she knew, there would still be fields, and the red tractor waiting in the yard, as if history were just another season to work through. They called it a safety demonstration, as if the word could sand away its edges. The Farmal H sat in the Jensen yard, freshly wiped down, red paint dull under a pale September sun. A small audience assembled, Walter with his hat in both hands, the guard, uniform cleaned and rifle slung square, a captain from camp, and a thin man in a suit and straw hat who smelled faintly of hair tonic in town, the agricultural officer. The women stood off to one side, hands folded, eyes fixed on Aiko. The surrender announcement lay only days behind them, but it had already changed the way men talked. The officer spoke of post-war skills, of rehabilitation, words that did not quite fit in her ear. "Go ahead, Miss Nakamura," the captain said, gesturing to the tractor. The guard turned it into Japanese with unnecessary formality. She stepped forward. The machine's metal felt warmer than the air. The scent of gasoline from the small starting tank met the dust and animal smells of the yard, An oddly familiar combination now. Walter had already set the controls. Gear in neutral, throttle eased back. He nodded toward the crank. "You know what to do." Aiko wrapped her fingers around the iron handle. It was the same weight, the same slickness of old grease against her palm as that first time. But her hand no longer trembled from ignorance, only from knowing too much. She drew in a breath. Behind her, the guard murmured in English, almost the same words as weeks before. "Go on. Give it hell." She pulled. The engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent. For a moment all she heard was the wind tugging at the officer's hat brim. Failure hovered in that pause, thin and sharp. Aiko reset the crank, feeling every notch as metal met metal. This time, she pictured not the Emperor's portrait or burned-out streets, but her mother's hands, Hana's face, the silent expectations of the women behind her. Survival, she thought, is also a kind of work. She heaved upward. The engine caught hard, shuddering into a full-throated roar. Vibration ran up her arms. She moved to the seat, boots finding pedals, hand resting steady on the throttle as the tractor settled into a steady idle. No lurch, no panic. The officer smiled thinly. The captain made a note on a clipboard. Walter simply watched her over the brim of his hat, something like recognition in his eyes. The machine waited under her feet, no longer entirely theirs, not entirely hers. A weight she could start and, when needed, stop. The word home returned first as paperwork. One morning, instead of being loaded into the truck, the women were marched to the admin hut. Inside, the air smelled of ink and floor polish. A new poster on the wall showed a ship in silhouette, black against a pale ocean, under English words she could not fully parse. Below it, a smaller notice in careful Japanese informed them that arrangements for repatriation were underway. There were priority categories, processing, ports. The clerk slid forms across the desk. "For Red Cross," the guard said, "to no family, where you go." At noon, back at the farm, Walter walked the fence line with her while the others washed beets. His hat shadowed his eyes. "They taking you all back soon?" he asked. She hesitated, picking her way through the words. "They say ships. Maybe soon, maybe not." Her hand brushed the rough top rail of the fence. "There is choice for some. To stay. Work." Walter's jaw worked. "If they'd let me, I'd vouch for you," he said, voice low. "You're a good hand. My wife, well, she'd get used to it." A faint, crooked smile. "A lot of things folks are having to get used to now." The offer hung between them like a plank over water. Safety, food, a machine she understood, and a lifetime as the woman who stayed. The second letter from Japan arrived a week later. Same thin paper, same sensor scars. This time the hand was her brother's again, shakier. The words were clearer. Mother alive, house gone, living with cousins, city, changed, but we are not finished. A final line, squeezed into the margin. If you can come back, we will need hands to carry. Aiko read it 3 times. The barracks around her blurred. All she saw was her mother's small frame lifting timbers, her brother's ink-stained fingers hauling bricks. That night, when Hana whispered in the dark, "Will you stay here?" Aiko answered before she could think herself into another shape. "No," she said softly. "I will go back. There is work to do there too." The word home no longer meant safety. It meant ruins and labor and faces she knew, and she found that, finally, she could live with that. The cold came first in the mornings, thin and sharp, frosting the water pails and turning the beet leaves brittle at the edges. Harvest ran hard through September. Then, one day, the truck that arrived at the farm carried not only the guard, but a second soldier and a stack of duffel bags. Today, the guard told Aiko, eyes not quite meeting hers, You go back to camp. Then train. Ship. The women worked one last half day, hands moving through habits their bodies had already learned to miss. At noon, Walter called them in. His wife stood on the porch, arms crossed over her apron. The boys lingered by the fence, older somehow than when the summer began. In the yard, duffels were lined up in a neat row. The autumn light flattened colors, making the tractor's red seem darker, like dried blood. The guard cleared his throat. "Say goodbye," he said, gesturing vaguely. "If you want." Hannah cried openly, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Kato-san bowed, formal and deep, words of thanks carefully neutral. The younger Jensen boy shifted from foot to foot, then blurted in English, "You did good work," before flushing crimson. Aiko stepped forward last. For a moment she could find no sentence that did not lie. She settled for the only thing that felt true. "Thank you for letting us work," she said. The phrase sounded thin in both languages. Walter nodded once, hat in his hands. "Safe trip," he managed. Before climbing into the truck, Aiko walked to the farmall. She laid her palm against the hood, now cool in the fall air, feeling only the faint echo of engine heat. Images flickered. The first clumsy start, the near runaway, the demonstration where she refused to fail. She bowed her head slightly to the machine, then to Walter behind it. Not allegiance, acknowledgement. As the truck pulled away, gravel rattling, she watched the fields recede, straight rows, the pinprick of the windmill, the shrinking red shape of the tractor. Somewhere beyond all this lay Yokohama's ruins. Somewhere inside her, a strip of Nebraska soil had already been laid alongside them. She did not know yet which memory would trouble her more. She only knew that from now on, whenever an engine coughed to life, she would feel again the weight of that crank in her hands and understand that power could cross any border more quietly than an army.